Hello. In case you haven't read any of the introductory material or haven't watched the introductory video that I'm planning on making, my name is Rich Caputo and I will be your instructor this semester. And for right now, I will be your tour guide through a brief history of very, very early Britain. Now, I get that you might be thinking this is a literature course. Why are we talking about the history of Britain? Well, the truth of the matter is that when you're dealing with really early literature, and that's what we're going to be dealing with, a lot of times it looks like a history course, feels like a history course, seems like a history course, and that's because early literature and early history are kind of wrapped together, intertwined, kind of like end up being the same thing. So that's why we're going to spend some time going through the early history of Britain. Some stuff we're doing just for interest's sake. Other stuff is super, super important for the rest of the course. The stuff that's super, super important, obviously I'll give you a heads up and tell you about that. But for now, let's start our journey voyage through very, very early Britain. Well, here's Britain up off of the north coast of Europe. The reason I throw that in there is like I have had a couple people who didn't know where Britain was, so I figured I'd throw it up. I'd put a map. It's right up here. Here's the thing, when you're talking about Britain, you really, the island is Britain. On the island of Britain, you have England, which is like where London and Manchester is. You have Wales, which is kind of down here. And you have Scotland up here. People in America, we use England and Britain interchangeably, but technically speaking, England is part of the island of Great Britain, and over here you have Ireland. Is that the hugest, most important deal in the world? No, obviously not. I just put it in there because, honestly, I put it in there because my ex-girlfriend's British and it used to annoy the heck out of her, so I put it in there. There you go. First, Britain has been more or less continually inhabited since 33,000 BCE, which is super, super crazy long ago. We know this because there was a discovery made called the Red Lady of Paviland. Those are her bones right here. I guess she's called the Red Lady because her bones sort of have like a red tint, but whatever. Those are the oldest remains of a person that we have in Britain, and they date back to 33,000 BCE. Was Britain inhabited before that? Probably, but we have no evidence of that, so we're going with this date, 33,000 BC. There you go. The people who lived back in Britain around that time, we don't know a whole heck of a lot about them, but we know a little bit. They left behind a bunch of like really, really interesting stuff. They left some like carvings on rocks, and for whatever reason, they were really fond of drawing these swirly things that you see over here. What do these swirly things mean? Honestly, no clue. A lot of people will tell you that they are the sun because I guess they're round and I guess that's all they're going on. But if you go to, I haven't been to Britain. I've been to Ireland, and you see these things like carved all over ancient rocks. When I was in Ireland, one of the places I went is this place here. It's called Newgrange. Basically, it's a mound that's built into the earth, and there's a little doorway right here. You can see a bunch of people hanging out there. If you go down into it, like it goes down, 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 and it's dark and it's dank and it's kind of creepy in there. But there's this one weird little, I think it's a pretty cool feature. Carved right above, I guess you'd call it the doorway, is this little tiny square. And I don't remember if it's once or twice. I think it might be twice. I think it's once a year, actually. The sun shines through this little tiny, it's really small, hole above the door, and it lights up the whole inside of this underground chamber. Why do I mention that? One, because it's really cool. And two, you think Stone Age people aren't that advanced or didn't know that much stuff. But you'd be surprised. In order to build that hole that illuminates on just one day of the year, you have to know you have to know a decent amount about astronomy, about architecture, about engineering, and it's a pretty cool accomplishment for people that lived like in 30,000 BC. And when I was at Newgrange, they have like a raffle where you put your name in like a jar and they select 5 people, and those 5 people get flown back to Ireland and they get to be inside Newgrange on that one day of the year. I think it's the summer equinox. And long story short, I put my name in, and I did not win, so I did not get to see it. Other things Stone Age Britain was famous for, they liked building rock formations. This is called Tai Nuad, which is in Wales, and it's a rock formation. Rocks put on top of each other. They really liked horse iconography. This is a giant white horse that's built into the hillside. I want to say it's in Dover. I'm not totally sure about that, but the rock formations are the more interesting ones to me. And anyone know the most famous rock formation in all of Britain, possibly all of the world? I'll wait for it. I'll wait for it. And Stonehenge! This is an artist's rendering of Stonehenge, what it looked like in its full glory. It doesn't look like that anymore. It looks like this, which is more or less the same, but it was more built up back in the day. We honestly don't know a heck of a lot. Well, we know a little bit about Stonehenge, but we know there's a lot we don't know. Most people will tell you it dates back to 3000 BC. Some people will tell you it dates back to 8000 BC. It's probably somewhere in between. What it is used for, that is the big $25,000 million question. And to this day, we don't know. Some people will tell you it's an old school calendar. Some people will tell you it was used for like sacrifices. Some people will tell you it was used for religious purposes. One of the things that people have recently found out about Stonehenge is the acoustics in there are crazy. The way the rocks are set up, it creates kind of like, for lack of a better term, an echo chamber. And if you chant a specific way in Stonehenge, the echoes reverberate around and around and around. And the current theory is that the way those echoes sound, it kind of sends the listeners into sort of a weird trance. And people will tell you that that has something to do with possibly a religious function of Stonehenge. But do we know? No, we really don't know, and we're still learning things about it. In fact, I think 2 years ago, they found out that Stonehenge was a lot bigger than originally thought because there are outlying stones that people didn't connect with them. And it's weird because the stones that were used to build Stonehenge came from Wales, which is like hundreds, if not like 1,000 miles away. So it took some doing to get these giant stones from Wales to Glastonbury in the middle of England, which is where it was. That's not to say life back in the Stone Age was all horses, swirly things, and rock formations. It was a brutal, brutal culture, and we have absolute evidence that people in Stone Age Britain committed all sorts of barbaric acts like human sacrifice and even child cannibalism. There was a pit of bones found up in the north, little kids, like babies, with knife scarring on their rib cage. And are there other explanations? Yeah, I'm sure there are other explanations, but best guess is the reason there were these knife scarring is because, well, they were peeling meat off of the bones. So, like I said, it wasn't all cake and candy back then. Fast forward to 1200 BC. We're taking a big jump in time, but we don't have time to dwell on what happened in between. A new and very, very super important culture makes its way to Britain. It's called the Celtic culture. Yes, that's where the Boston Celtics got their name from. That's why I have this logo down here. Not that I'm a Celtics fan. I'm actually a Lakers fan. I'm taking a break from being a Lakers fan because I can't stand LeBron James and I refuse to root for a team that he's on. But that's neither here nor there. The Celtic culture is mostly associated with Ireland, but true story, they actually probably came from like Central Europe, like Germany, Austria, and they spread out. They made it to Spain, but they also hopped across the English Channel and made it to Britain, and they made it to Ireland. And this is the first super important early British culture we're going to talk about. You know something about the Celts, even if you don't. The religion. They were very, very much into nature worship. The oak tree was particularly sacred to them, and their priestly class was something called the Druids. Druids are one of those things I think that made their way into popular culture through like fantasy novels, and this picture right here is from World of Warcraft because there is a druid class in Warcraft. If you play D&D, there's a druid class in D&D. So the name of the word druid has made its way to popular culture, but I don't know if most people know where it came from. It actually comes from the Celtic people and the Celtic nature worship religion. That's where druids come from. Here is, as my label up here says, important, like really, really, really important. Understand this. Know this. This is going to be so important for the first couple learning modules. The Celtics were pagan. Well, what does pagan mean? Number one, pagans worship multiple gods. They had gods for everything. They had gods for the sun. They had gods for the moon, gods for rivers, gods for trees, gods for earthquakes, gods for the sky, gods, everything. Everything had a god. It was very, very different than like the monotheistic Judeo-Christian Islam religions where there was one god. Pagans worshipped multiple gods. Super important. Cannot emphasize that enough. Know that. Understand that. Multiple gods. It's the first thing you need to understand. Second thing, as with most pagan cultures, not all, but the vast majority of pagan cultures were warrior cultures. They were, life in the ancient world was constant low-level warfare. I mean, think about it. If you ran out of food, you couldn't like swing down to like 7-Eleven and pick up a couple, packs of chips and some soda. You had to go to your neighbor's village or your neighbor's town and take it by force. And especially in some place like Britain, which is relatively small, land was at a premium. You were constantly fighting. This is the same thing even if you go to ancient Greece. Ancient Greece was constant low-level warfare. And what ended up happening is because fighting and war was so important, your value as a person was determined by how good you were at fighting. That's what got you into like the VIP champagne room of the afterlife. Nowadays, that's weird to us because you think, going to heaven, going to the good place and not HE double hockey sticks is predicated on being a good person. If you give to charities, if you pet kittens and stuff like that, and you're just like a nice person. Not at all in a pagan culture. What got you into the good part of the afterlife and what got you honor, respect, what got you, praise in this world was how good you were on the battlefield, how many people you took down, how many kills you had. Those are two super important things. I can't emphasize it enough. Pagans, multiple gods, warrior culture. Take a second, let that sink in, process that, and we'll move on. Now we get to one of my favorite parts, the Roman invasion of Britain. So for those of you who don't know, for my money, the Roman military was hands down the best trained, most hardcore military in the history of the world. I know a lot of people want to say it was the Spartans. I will take the Roman army over the Spartans anytime. People want to say it's things like Navy SEALs and the Army Rangers. Like obviously they have like machine guns and stuff, but like in terms of like pure training and what you had to do, the Roman army was next level good. As the Roman Empire expanded, they wanted more and more land. Starting in 43 AD, Rome decided to invade and conquer Britain. This is something that has only been done successfully twice in the history of the world. Because Britain is an island, it has some degree of defensibility, blah, blah, blah. Only 2 times in the whole entire history of the world has Britain ever been successfully invaded. Rome is one of the people who did it, starting in 43 AD. Obviously, Britain did not take too kindly to being invaded by Rome, and they put up a heck of a fight. One of the major leaders of this Celtic resistance was a woman named Boudica. There's no easy way to put this, is massacred an entire Roman legion, the Roman 9th Legion, which was Rome's best legion. She and her ally straight up massacred them. People they can't find the bodies to this day. They eviscerated them, destroyed, really, really destroyed them. But it was the Roman army, and eventually Rome could just throw so many waves at you that eventually they defeated Boudica. Not going to get into what they did to her because it's not pleasant to talk about. But if you've ever seen the movie Brave, she's sort of based on Boudica. Rome really, 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 really wanted to take over all of Britain, and they almost did, except if you go up to the north of Britain, Scotland, it's rugged, it's mountainy, the terrain is difficult, it's tough, and that bred a special kind of warrior who lived in Scotland. They were called the Picts, and they put up so much resistance. Rome could never conquer the north of Britain, so they had the idea of saying, well, screw this, and they built a wall across the north of Britain. It's called Hadrian's Wall. The remains of it are still there, and that marked as north as Britain's empire ever got. They never could quite take over all of Britain. Almost. Scotland held out. Okay. Here's the thing. By 120 AD, Hadrian's Wall's walled off. Britain is pretty much under Roman control. But think about this. You don't have telephones, internet, any real way of rapid communication. So, yes, Rome had a couple legions stationed in Britain, but they didn't really have that much control or impact over everyday life in Britain. They made sure taxes were paid, and if anyone revolted or anything like that, they put it down. But functionally, not a huge impact. Part of what made that easier was the Celtics, like we said, were pagan. The Romans were pagan. And Romans worship multiple gods. The Celts worship multiple gods. Did they worship the same gods? No. But the thing is, if you worship multiple gods, you really rarely go to war over religion, because if you're worshiping 200 gods and somebody else is worshiping 200 gods, you don't get this idea that my God is right and your God is wrong. Pagans could more or less coexist, so Romans didn't get upset that the Celts were worshiping different gods than them. They didn't. All that changed in 312 AD. For a bunch of reasons, the Roman Emperor Constantine decides to change the religion of the entire Roman Empire to Christianity. The way it happens is kind of an interesting story. For the longest time, the Romans persecuted Christians, like did really bad things to them, like crucified them, fed them to lions, skinned them alive. That's why we got St. Valentine. Really terrible things. Emperor Constantine was going into war, and he was grossly outnumbered, something like 10-1. And the morning of the battle, when he knew he was outnumbered 10-1, he was out walking, and he comes to the side of a lake, and he looks up in the sky, and supposedly he hears a voice saying, "In this sign you will conquer." And he sees the sun dance the sign of the cross in the sky. And he took that to mean if he painted crosses on the shields of all his soldiers, even though he was outnumbered, he would win. Painted shields on all the painted crosses on all his soldiers' shields, went into battle, and he won. And he thanked the Christian God for that. And just like that, he converted to Christianity. Thing is, when your emperor converts to Christianity, your whole entire empire has to convert too. Which means every single person in the entire Roman Empire was supposed to convert to Christianity. Here's the thing. The people, the Celts, way up in Britain, who have been practicing paganism for 30,000 years, whatever, however long it was, do you think they really converted? No. When the Romans rolled through and checked up on things, they would maybe make the sign of the cross and pretend to pray to the Christian God. It was all pretend. It was all fake. When no one was looking, they still worshiped the same pagan gods that they did for hundreds and thousands of years. So they converted publicly. Privately, no, wasn't a real conversion. Like all empires, Rome eventually started to collapse. It took a long time for the Roman Empire to fall, and why the Roman Empire fell, I've seriously taken literally a whole class on why the Roman Empire fell. They overextended their borders, the Roman emperors got too corrupt, they started spending too much money. Some people will tell you it's because they lined their aqueducts with lead and systematically lowered the IQ of their empire by 50 points, accidentally, of course. Lots and lots of reasons. Problem is, the point is here, when the empire started falling, they started calling in troops from the furthest reaches of the empire. And since Britain was literally the northernmost point of the empire, that's one of the places they let go first. That's one of the places they called the legions home from first. So around 410, the Roman army withdrew from Britain. Here's the thing. The withdrawal of the army from Britain had a couple effects. Here's one of them. Yes, it's bad to be conquered by a foreign power. It's bad. Yes, I get that. It is. But if you were going to be conquered by a foreign power, Rome is not a bad one to be conquered by. Because like I said, one, they more or less left you alone. Two, they bought things with them like roads. They built roads. Roman roads are still in use today. The road that goes up and down Italy is called the Via Appia, or the Appian Way. It was built during Roman times, and it's still functional. They had sanitation. They had bathhouses. Believe it or not, Rome had hot and cold running water. They could pipe in water through these aqueducts from really, really far away. Rome wasn't that bad to be conquered by. Also, you had the biggest, baddest empire in the world and the best trained army protecting you. So no one else was going to invade you. You were not getting attacked by anybody else. When Rome left, Britain got invaded left, right, up, down for about 150 years straight. From 450 to 600, the Angles, that's where the word English comes from. The Saxons invaded. The Vandals invaded. The Goths invaded. I don't mean people who shop at Hot Topic and have their nails painted black. You had just waves and waves and waves of people coming into Britain. And here's the effect of that. Think about how many languages and cultures you have mixing together on these islands of Britain. You had the Celtics and their language. You had the Romans and Latin. You had the language of all those people I just told you, the Angles, the Saxons, the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, a bunch of different Goths, all mixing together on this island. Most people will tell you that the hardest language in the world to learn is English. And one of the reasons English is so hard to learn is because it's this mixture of all these different languages. These are just the beginning. We haven't even gotten into languages that are going to be mixed later on. I used to know there's one sentence that contained like something like 12 words, and each one of those words is from a different language. That's the effect of the invasion. You have these languages and cultures mixing together, which means stories, foods, traditions, but they're all these different languages that are going to mix together and eventually merge and become English. Long story short, by about 600, Britain had organized itself into 7 kingdoms that were largely stable and were pretty much well entrenched. The other effect of the Roman withdrawal was they didn't have a reason to pretend to be Christian anymore. They didn't care. Like, there was nobody watching them. So any trace of Christianity disappeared. Some traces were left, but most traces were gone, and Britain went back to its Celtic pagan roots. Thing is, once things started settling down and Britain wasn't constantly being invaded, this gentleman named Pope Gregory decided he was going to do something about this. He was going to reintroduce Christianity to Britain, and he sent a bunch of missionaries, up to Britain to reconvert them. And it took about 75 years, but after 75 years, most of Britain was reconverted to Christianity. And one of the stories we're going to be talking about is Caedmon's hymn, and I'll get to that in a second. This guy here, the Venerable Bede. Very rarely can you say with any sort of like certainty that a person was like the smartest, most educated person alive during a given period in history, but you could say that about the Venerable Bede. He was probably, during this time, the smartest, most educated person alive. He had like the biggest library in the world. Granted, it was about 50 books, but there weren't that many books back then. And his writings are one of the main sources of knowledge we have about that time. And Caedmon's hymn, which you guys will be reading, comes from one of his books. But I forgot to tell you, starting in 800, Britain was invaded again. This time by the Vikings, and I'm sure you know who the Vikings are. The Vikings didn't mess around. They rolled through. They killed everything in their path. They looted. They sacked. They pillaged. Alfred the Great eventually put a stop to Britain's being invaded by the Vikings, and Alfred the Great was this was such a huge deal stopping the Vikings that some people will tell you he was the inspiration for King Arthur. It probably wasn't, but maybe. The period we were talking about is called the Dark Ages. It's about from 460, right around from when Rome fell, to 1485. And the reason it's called the Dark Ages is because Rome was considered the light of the world. And once Rome fell, things kind of took a step backwards. Sanitation wasn't a thing anymore. Hot and cold running water, gone. Rome had some sort of order and stability and lent some shape and organization to Europe. Once Rome fell, civilization took several steps back. There's this book that's no one reads it anymore. It's called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It's one of the most important books that nobody ever reads. And the idea behind it is things like art and literature and painting and sculpture and music they only matter once your level of subsistence needs are met. Like, it doesn't matter if you can paint the Mona Lisa if you don't know where your next food is coming from. It doesn't matter if you can sculpt a sculpture if you're going to freeze to death at night. It doesn't matter if you can make a beautiful piece of music if you're going to be invaded and attacked every other day. With Rome, your subsistence needs were pretty much met. Take Rome away, civilization rewinds, and there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of art and culture going on. Within the Middle Ages, it can be broken down into a couple other periods. We're not going to worry about that. But right now, we're going to talk about the very, very earliest middle part of it, 650, 1100. What was literature like during that time period? Like I said, Old English is a messy mixture of all the languages we just talked about. It wasn't written down, it was mostly oral. Writing wasn't even a thing until the second conversion to Christianity, because they're the only people who really knew how to write were the monks and the clergy. Poetry was the only genre thing that was the only genre in existence, and it's not poetry like roses are red, violets are blue, schmoopy schmoopy, I love you. This is the kind of poetry that ended with a guy go with a spear through his head. It was something called epic heroic poetry, and it was about heroes. But that's going to be Beowulf. That's going to be like the second or third thing we read. All right, so what you guys are going to read are two pieces of conversion literature. It was written during that time when Pope Gregory sent missionaries to convert the Celtics in Britain. And here's the problem. You have a culture, the pagans, that believed in multiple gods and were very, very warlike and violent. These missionaries are in a tough position. They had to make Christianity, which was very, very different than paganism, believed in one God and was, in theory at least, predicated on peace. How do you make that appealing to a pagan, warlike culture? That is what Caedmon's Hymn and Dream of the Rood are all about. So go off, read those. There's a discussion question to talk about, and good luck. Have fun.